as is custom at the NRP annual meeting, I get to talk about the status of the National Research Platform. And there's going to be a little bit of sort of stuff that you've seen before, because it basically defines the vision of NRP. And then I'm going to, I hope that there's lots of stuff that you haven't seen before. And so I want to first acknowledge that this year we have 3 themes. The one, probably most obvious one, if you just look on the agenda, is that there's an AI education on NRP theme. The second one is a theme that we've already had for years now, which is the notion that domain-specific architecture are here to come as a result of the end of scaling of Moore's law. So as Moore's law dies, something else has to give us the kind of orders of magnitude improvements. And when I think about this, there's really only 2 things that can drive scientific computing forwards. One is vastly improved algorithms, whether AI or conventional. And 2 is a garden of new architectures where the silicon you have, given that you don't get free silicon and for your dollars every 2 years anymore, that silicon has to be used in more creative ways, and that leads you to domain-specific architectures. And tomorrow will be the afternoon program will be partially dedicated to that. And then we're trying something new this year, and we're trying to facilitate domain science to expand in the AI education curriculum. Basically, our colleagues at General Atomics came to me some time ago and asked, how can we prepare the fusion energy a workforce development, and can you help? And so we've had a session yesterday that, given that this is the first time that we're doing this, I kept it off the agenda, and it was invitation only, a session to facilitate fusion experts to meet education experts and see if we can create some kind of cross feed. And that was very successful. And so you'll hear some of fusion in the keynote tomorrow. And that is a new experiment. I consider it as an experiment at 600p for the first time. And afterwards, I'll take stock, and maybe we'll repeat this next year with a different kind of domain. So if you have suggestions for what kind of domain we should pick next year, let me know, send me an email, because that's going to be some kind of discussion throughout the year to prepare for maybe doing something like that again next year. Now, let's dive right in with the map of the USA and all of the colleges and universities, all of the higher education degree granting institutions. This comes from the Department of Education. There's 3,900 accredited institutions of higher learning. Now, out of those 3,900, there's only 146 R1s. And so if you think of sort of roughly speaking, the R1s are the ones with the big money and the big research portfolios, and the rest has a focus more on education, then really when we're talking about the community of all higher ed institutions, we're talking predominantly about an education focus. And research comes for the ride. And that, driven by numbers, then is part of the motivation for our vision. And so the best articulation of that vision is the minds we need. And I'm not going to read this to you. The punchline is that we want to connect every community college, every minority serving institution, and every college and university, including all urban, rural, and tribal institutions, to world-class and secure R&E infrastructure. That's basically what the vision is. And that's what NRP ultimately wants to accomplish. And now, how does that get elaborated a little bit in terms of more techno-speak? We're trying to create an open national cyber infrastructure that allows the Federation of Cyber Infrastructure at all 4,000 accredited at higher institutions and nonprofit research institutions. So the likes of Jen Zuckerberg or Flatiron or Gates Foundation are totally part of, or the national labs for that matter, are totally part of the story. And we would like to build something where everybody can join according to their means and controls. And what ultimately we want to add to the notions of open science, open data, and open source is a new term, and we call that open cyber infrastructure. And what we're thinking of when we say open cyber infrastructure, we literally think of anything that is programmable to first order at some level. It's open compute, open storage, but also open data access, not just putting something somewhere, but also accessing it transparently and open. So the notion of a content delivery network is integral to what we're trying to accomplish. And then open devices, instruments, IoT, sensor networks, the whole idea of the computing continuum from the field into the data center and back and forth, that is part of the scope ultimately of NRP. So we're working with Sage in some corners, with HP RAN, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's ultimately the corny statement of openness for an open society. That's probably no longer that popular these days, but we'll stick to it and see until we get our fingers slapped. And so now, if this kind of is the aspiration, 4,000 colleges, that's a hell of an aspiration. So how can we have any chance in hell to actually achieve this? And I think that a conceptual way of thinking about this is that there will never be one project with one PI that rules them all. That's just not going to happen. And so you have to think about it as a community building effort, that NRP fundamentally is you guys. It's a community. And we're building a community where we hope that lots of us are successful with getting funded by the federal government or foundations or whatever. And all of us have our own individual foci, and that all fits together in the symbol of a flower, where in the center there's a shared community vision, and the petals are the individual differences of different projects that are all funded, and they have a small overlap in the core where they contribute to each other. And then they have a large petal flower that goes out where each and every project has its own scope, its own objectives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by creating an ecosystem and a community like that, we hope to accomplish ultimately what the goal is here of building a federation across 4,000 institutions. I'll take questions afterwards or in the middle, whatever you want. Now, how does this get realized by NRP? And I want to start with the strategy of how we are trying to reach 4,000 institutions. How can we possibly reach even 1,000 institutions or 500? And I think that the strategy ultimately is, when you're trying to engage a large number of organizations, you have to build on existing social networks. If you don't build on existing networks, you're never going to get there from scratch. And so when we asked ourselves, who are the social networks that we can build upon, the obvious answer was it's the regional research and education networks that play a crucial role, because in each part of the country, there's a research and education network, and those regional education networks are social networks via the quilt. And so by tapping into that social network of these regional networks, we can actually reach all of these colleges and do something that is unique and different and accomplish ultimately the goal. And you'll hear more about this for the case of Scenic in the next talk. And then we want to exploit the ongoing transformation of higher ed. And we'll hear lots of things about that. We want to reduce the total cost of ownership of compute and data infrastructure for colleges. And the notion here is that even if everybody had infinite amount of sums of money, there are lots of colleges, if you look on this map, that are in places where the labor market is not such that it's easy to hire the right people to do cyber infrastructure and user support and scientific computing and da-da-da-da-da-da. It doesn't make sense for smaller entities to actually build that labor force themselves. And so what we're ultimately doing in NRP is we're trying to use centralized services and centralized team where that makes the most sense, and use decentralized ownership where that makes the most sense. And by federation, create something that ultimately works and reduces the total cost of ownership for the colleges via economies of scale by having centralized services and centralized teams. Okay, and then finally, as we solve the AI education total cost of ownership pain point for colleges, we also advance research capabilities as a desired side effect. I'm working on the premise that for the vast majority of colleges out of those 3,900, education is what is the bread and butter that pays the bills. And research is where the pleasure comes in and the extras in addition to what pays the bills. And if I want to make a transformative change, I need to address what pays the bills and then bring in infrastructure for research via the back door, so to speak, as a side effect. And that is ultimately what we're doing via this strategy. And that's why we took and put AI education as the focus on this meeting in order to achieve that. So now a word about CNIC. My favorite statistics of the community that CNIC serves is the statistics that I learned from the California community colleges. There are 20 million students in the United States. 2 million of them are enrolled in the California Community College system. That's an enormous number. And so for me, that fact means that if we can manage with NRP to serve the community colleges of California, then we're 10% done. And therefore, we have a fighting chance of whatever we learn there, export and apply to all kinds of other areas all over the country. There's going to be differences in different places in the US. That's obvious. But we can learn a hell of a lot within California and work with individual RENs all over the country and export that and figure out how that can come together into a national infrastructure. So that then brings me to Quilt. There'll be a session with Jen Leisure, the leader of Quilt. And you can see it's a very eclectic landscape across the nation. Each one of these is a different REN in the different colors. And that brings me to the technical underpinning of NRP. When the rubber hits the road and we go from the aspirational and the conceptual and the procedural to the technological, we have a vertical software stack that we promote and that has enough flexibility in its architecture to build on both horizontally and vertically. What I mean by this is you can build horizontally by bringing in 4,000 institutions. And you build vertically by letting us do the plumbing and let others do services and all kinds of interesting other things on top. And I'll give you 2 examples of building on top of the NRP. I don't look at the NRP as something that is cast in stone. I look at it as a framework that is open horizontally to federate across the nation and vertically to be a playground for others to use and play with and build more interesting things, higher level services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And and 2 examples of vertical extensions of NRP. There's going to be There's going to be a dedicated. There was already yesterday a tutorial on NDP, and there's going to be a dedicated talk on the National Data Platform tomorrow at 3:30 to 4. And the way I look at it is NRP provides a foundation to provide you with a non-local Kubernetes-based deployment mechanism so that you can then build service containers into it in addition to signs and application containers, and therefore can build interesting structures on top. And one of those interesting structures is the Open Science Data Federation. It's a data access network that follows the tagline, any data, anytime, anywhere. It's not about distributing the data. It's about accessing the data everywhere equally well. That's the, at least, aspiration. And it right now has 35 caches at 28 institutions across 4 continents. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in Derek's talk, because we offer that as one of the data options in NRP. And so more details at 11. And then on top of the OSDF, you can build NDP to solve your cataloging, metadata, federated metadata catalogs. There's also workflows in there. So there's a bunch of capabilities that allows you to find the data and get all the fair characteristics out of it. That is, so in my head, I see the plumbers of NRP that have their community and their applications focus, but also they provide an infrastructure where then OSDF can layer itself on top to provide data access globally, and NDP can layer itself on top to provide fair. And so that's sort of part of the pedal of different objectives with a core or vision. Now I get to the actual status after a lot of visionary and philosophy. So first, where are we with hardware? We right now have 425 nodes across, if I count this, Asia, US, Europe, at least 3 continents. And if you look at, Dima gave me a spreadsheet of where all this where all this hardware sits, and then I asked myself, looking at these entries, as how do I organize this? How do I get this into my head in some kind of conceptual thing? And I realized that it's actually, just thinking about it, 6 international, 21 of the hardware nodes are actually network POPs, a network point of presence, which talks towards the engagement with the RANs and the networking community. And then 45 are at US colleges. And so we want to grow the US colleges from 45 to, say, 1,000, just for picking a round number. And in the process, we will grow the 21 network POPs probably by 100, I don't know, to 100 or something like this, give or take, maybe. And then international, we'll figure out what happens there over time. I don't have a very concrete goal. But the growth desire lies primarily in the colleges. Now, I can't stand here and talk without mentioning GPN, because while we're now all excited about scenic air, we have to admit as Californians that they were there first. The Great Plains was there first. In fact, they still today have more colleges in the Great Plains network that are connected to NRP than we have in California, which is kind of interesting. And at least from a perspective of not UCs. If I don't count the UCs, there's still more in GPN. So there's about a dozen across 7 states. And so now I'm moving on to resources. What's actually on there? These 425 nodes, what does it mean? What is it? And I like to sometimes think about it. It's the NVIDIA Museum, because every single GPU that exists since the 1080, actually since the 1070 and 1080s, we kind of have somewhere. It's not exactly true, but it's almost true. And so I've given you this ordered by number. And then the interesting one is other GPUs is 148. So basically, the variety of the GPUs is so dramatic that I can't even enumerate them all, because it's just the diversity, heterogeneity just is off scale. And then in addition to all the GPUs, we now have the first node with non-NVIDIA GPUs. We have just added a node with Qualcomm AI 100s. Qualcomm likes to think of themselves as the NVIDIA for the mobile market, whatever. So given that this is the Qualcomm Institute we're in, and that the Jacob School of Engineering, San Diego, UCSD, has a very strong Qualcomm connection. And so we figured it would be a sin if we didn't actually have their hardware on the platform for you guys to play with. And so we've started, John and has been starting to play with this, and Mohammed with inference initially, to get a little bit of a feel of it. And you're welcome to explore. That's the latest piece of hardware. In addition, we've had FPGAs for some time, and I believe, Mohammed should correct me if I'm wrong, or Dima should correct me. I believe that the Intel Stratix, the 10MX, came in new within the last year. So that wasn't on my slide last year. Either I left them out last year or they were actually added this year. So a second type of FPGAs is now available. In addition, there are 11,000 and some change x86 CPU cores in nodes that have no accelerators. Some of those nodes are not accessible to anything other than serving data. And some of them are actually accessible as just CPU nodes. And so if I then ask, and the storage last year it was 13 petabyte, this year it's 22 petabyte, we're growing. 3 ARM nodes. So do we have other architecture then? And okay, and they are ARM nodes just CPUs, or do they also have GPUs in them?
2 are CPUs and 1 Grace Hopper.
Yes, I forgot. So we have 1 Grace Hopper in there, which is in the other GPUs, in one of the 148. And then there is a CPU ARM node. So there is more eclectic stuff there. And then the storage. And now I'm switching to, you're going to hear more about this in Larry Smart's talk on Thursday. And this is the kind of way that I like to think of getting my head around the numbers in the user community. So what this shows is a log-log plot. On one axis, the x-axis is CPU core hours, and the y-axis is GPU core hours. Every single dot here is a namespace. In other words, it's a project in NRP. And then it's zero suppressed because a log plot can't go to 0, right? So at 100. So, and then we have on the dots, some at the top end, Larry indicated what kind of things they do. So as you can see, there's an awful lot of large consumers that are AI/ML researchers, some observatories, and some community software. And Larry will talk all about what these things are tomorrow. Now you can reorthogonize this from not the projects, but into the institutions where the PIs come from. And then you get something like this here. And not surprisingly, probably, UC San Diego is off scale, partly because of history, partly because of there's a fair amount of hardware owned by UCSD inside NRP that is not actually NSF funded. It's all kinds of other funding streams. And then, but when you then go down, it is all over the map. And the red stars are MSIs. And if you look at the numbers, if you make a cutoff again at 100, 100, just like on the previous log-log plot, then you find that 35 campuses used hundreds of millions of NRP GPU hours and CPU core hours in calendar 2024. And out of those 35, 16 are MSIs and 4 are in EPSCoR states. So the notion of democratizing, and I'd say that we've sort of we've changed what exactly we count as our own metrics to judge ourselves. And I believe these 2 slides is the 2 slides that you will now see every year in my talks, because I think that I want to judge ourselves in terms of growth by these 2 sets of plots, because that's in my mind what matters. It matters the number of projects, and which implies wide number of PIs, but it also matters of where those PIs come from, and that those come from a very wide and ever-growing number of institutions. And now I wanted to dive into education use of NRP. Last year, we had a very small education piece and had a talk by UCSD on what UCSD is doing. This year, we have a much larger education and set of sessions, and we didn't give a talk on UCSD. So I'm going to use a few slides from UCSD's experience to motivate some of the reasoning why I think AI education is crucial, and education in general is crucial. And so I'm going to give you this slide first, and the only reason why I'm adding this, all of these slides are from the organization inside UCSD that actually runs this cluster. It's not NRP. It is a copy of NRP almost to the T in software infrastructure, everything. And the reason why I left this in is this has only 132 GPUs and they're all ancient. I actually looked at some point, somebody asked me, my boss, the dean, asked me, how much money is in this cluster? And I went to eBay and Google basically and asked, what does a 1080 Ti cost today if you want to buy it? What does the 2080 Ti cost today? What's a A30, A5000? What do these things cost? And I multiplied it up, and the entire amount of money in this cluster that UCSD runs for its entire education operations is less than $100,000. If you were to buy this today, exactly this hardware, you'd spend less than $100,000. It's actually remarkable. And it's remarkable once you put in here what they do with it. And as this is a time history of the number of the course enrollment per quarter, we're in a quarter system. And so you can sort of see the last academic year had quarters of 6,000, 5,000, 5,600 as enrollment. So within the last academic year, A124, there were 16,900 students enrolled. And if you then look and take out the multiple and just look for unique students, there is 9,000 unique students who use this infrastructure in some course or the other. And now if you take this face value and look up via Google, how many students were there enrolled in fall 2023, it's 33,792 students at UCSD. So you divide the two number and you get 22% of all UCSD undergrads use this infrastructure in AY24. That's actually an impressive number. 20% of all UCSD undergrads have used an infrastructure in their classroom education that has a value attached to it of no more than $100,000, and nevertheless we managed to teach them courses with it. And I want you to remember, because the message is you don't have to buy top-of-the-line gear. You don't have to spend an arm and a leg on the Grace Blackwell of the future. There's a hell of a lot of other stuff that you can do education with that is much more cost-effective. You also don't necessarily have to pay $90 or $86 an hour for an 8-way H100 in Amazon. Because it's just not worth it. You can do this a hell of a lot cheaper. And I encourage people to use NRP to experiment on what it is they really need. We have every GPU under the sun. You can figure out what do you need for your investment at your college in order to make this work. And don't be shy buying from eBay within reason. So now let's play with these numbers a little bit. 20 million students attend college in the United States. I looked this up via Google, right? Or actually, Ashley found it for me, the number. And you will hear a talk tomorrow by David Goldberg that says that 50% of students at San Diego State University have, in a survey, said that they want more formal education in AI than they have gotten so far. You can take that number, or you can take 20% of UC San Diego undergrads have used data and compute in their classroom in AY24. Doesn't matter. The details don't matter. Then you multiply that by 20 million, and you realize that there is a need between 4 and 10 million college students in the US per year that need data and compute in their classroom. So when I'm setting aspirations, 1,000 colleges and 1 million students isn't quite cutting it to meet the demand. And so that sort of sets the scale of where we aspire to go. And then I have a little bit of, I like to show this because it shows you what schools within, basically which deans have made the most use out of this infrastructure at UCSD. And it's the obvious, right? The School of Engineering, you'd expect that. That's where computer science is in. It's also the obvious, the data scientists. Obviously, they should be using my school, the School of Computing Information Data Science. That they should be using this. But what's the non-obvious, the least obvious, the most surprising, social science is actually among the largest number of courses that have been taught on this infrastructure. Now, to be fair, social science at UCSD includes cognitive science. It includes psychology. And so there's a number of very numbers-heavy departments in there. But nevertheless, social science is not the typical place where you'd expect this. And then if you look around, biological science and physical science, I would have expected more in physical science. So I expect the growth in the future to be coming out of biology and physics, out of chemistry, math, and whereas the others are probably going to be maintaining the level that they have. That's sort of my personal expectation. Then where we an NRP, and so we canvassed. We have no means to automate this, unfortunately, at this point. We haven't figured out how to actually count number of students on the platform or number of courses on the platform or anything like this. And so literally, this is probably incomplete. Elham sent around email to people that he knew are using educational NRP, and this is sort of what we got from that. And I want to, and then he also got in the process feedback, and I don't like to just claim that everything's rosy in NRP. We have challenges. Not everybody is always happy. And so I want to give you a little bit of sense what the negative feedback is and what is the lessons learned out of this exercise. And the first statement is, NRP is not as robust as AWS, Azure, or Google. We're not a billion-dollar company or trillion-dollar company. It's probably not too surprising, right? And at the same time, it means there is room to improve. And we take this to heart. We want to strive for more redundancy of our core services. We learned some best practices on data preloading for scalability. Drexel put that as an input, which is actually very much a best practice that we should propagate to the rest of you. If you have 300 students in an exam setting and they all have to upload data into their container, it's not going to go very well. It's better you preload the containers before you start the exam, basically, and stuff like this. The hardest one for us to deal with is the 24/7 versus best effort support. And there is a fundamental difference between what the National Science Foundation is willing to support for research purposes. It's basically all best effort. It's 9 to 5. The SDSC, for its large systems that we run for the nation, we're not expected to have uptime over the weekend. We do have uptime over the weekend because we do, but it's not expected. We're not paid for it. And so there is a fundamental problem of us being unable to provide 24/7 support. That's just fact. And so I think one of the challenges we have is we need to define expectations better. And then we need to understand where can we tweak things via redundancy to minimize failures and maximize availability and robustness. And that's a research project that will last for a few years, and you will see over time improvements. And I think the last thing that we learned via this, if you look at who among these is the happiest, the ones who are the happiest are the ones who own their own hardware. So the lesson learned is bring your own hardware works better than the soup kitchen approach. If you're trying to piggyback on the hardware others own, that's not going to make you very happy in an education environment where you have to have it alive and running and available when you want it in the classroom. I think that is sort of a lesson learned here. And so we want to help you by owning your own hardware, bringing the total cost of ownership down, bring it into NRP. We operate it, figure out how to do this without having to pay for 24/7 support. And then you get the kind of near AWS experience for 1/10 of the money or 100th of the money. And that's sort of the aspiration. I don't know, how am I with time? Am I already out of time? Does anybody know? I think I have until, do I have until 10? Okay, I'm good. Thank you. NRP, then there is this, that sort of wraps it up in terms of vision for community building, vision for education, why, how, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let me make one more statement about the previous section. While I aspire to 1,000 colleges and 1 million users across all 50 states of the United States and territories, I had a slide in there and took it out because I don't want to help to that aspiration. Because there's no way in hell that we can achieve that aspiration without finding other funding sources. And so one of the things that is on my book to figure out within the next few years is what other funders other than the NSF, because right now we rely too heavily for my taste on just NSF money. We rely on NSF money via the C-STAR program so that you get your hardware, and we rely on NSF money for the core infrastructure and for building bits and pieces. I'd like to figure out a way to, and when I went to the NSF and said, if I think we can scale this out, we have an idea, we have a strategy, how do I scale it? Who's going to pay for 1,000 colleges and 1 million users? They said, oh, make the colleges pay. And I want to avoid this as much as I can, for as long as I can, because that's not a way to make friends, giving somebody a bill. And it's also not, it's not the right time to do anything like this. Maybe 10 years from now, we will have some kind of recharging operations because we have reached a scale that demands it. But in the next few years, one of my charges is to figure out where else can money come from so that we can scale NRP core, the stuff that Dima and Derek's group do, that can scale out, that the stuff that Maida's group do, that they can scale out to a few hundred colleges and not just the kind of 50 that we have today. And it's my problem to solve. Okay, so then we go to the other main thrust of computer science R&D and domain R&D. And I want to say very little this year. I talked much more about this last year, and I want to just show the same slide I showed last year again, because to me, that slide says it all. And I'm going to explain first the left. This is a slide that John Shelf showed at Supercomputing 23. And what it does is, on the y-axis, it shows you the improvement in performance across the top 500 HPC systems in, if I remember, how many years? In 11 years, I believe. So basically, a point on this is horizontal means that compared to 2009, compared to 11 years prior, what does the top 500 look like? How much performance has scaled up? And it used to be at about 1,000 performance scalement. And all of that, by and large, there wasn't more money in the top 500. There was just, you got more for free because Moore's law doubled the amount of computing that you got every 2 years, and you got it for the same amount of dollars. That's simple. And then sometime around 2012, all hell broke loose. Moore's law ended, or slowed down, or whatever you want to call it. No more doubling for free every 2 years, and it crashed. This multiplier crashed over 11 years from 1,000 to about 10 in 11 years. That is an incredibly threatening observation to all of us, because all of science, ultimately the first order, relies on the fact that stuff gets cheaper fast, right? And while data still grows exponentially, the amount of data we produce still grows exponentially, the amount of money, the amount of compute we get per $1 million does no longer scale exponentially. And as everybody knows, who's ever looked at an exponential, you can't beat an exponential when it's working against you. It's not possible, because sooner or later you get screwed. And so that very fact that you have this dive is an incredibly scary fact of engineering. And it requires the observation that Mark Papermaster put so nicely into a slide. He's the CTO of AMD still. And he did this a few years at a Dell event that I went to in Austin. And it is so nice because it's so simple to understand. He has this notion that the x-axis is the total variety of different kind of things that you can do with a computer. And the different and the narrowness of the peak is for different kinds of hardware. CPUs were very broad, they were very generic. You could do anything with a CPU. Not everything, but almost everything. And GPUs are a challenge. Not every algorithm works on a GPU equally well. The algorithms have to be designed for the GPUs. There's a lot of engineering that goes in, a lot of human effort to make algorithms that work well on CPUs gain from the factor of 10 or 100 acceleration that GPUs should give you per dollar. And it gets even worse when you go to FPGAs or ASICs or some other architecture that is very specific to the domain. And the standard, when John talks about this, and I take his statement face value, he knows about this much better than I do. He puts out his iPhone and says, this iPhone has 7 different processors, all of which are custom designed, except for one. One is generic. The others are custom designed to do just one thing. And that's the future of computing, is what these people tell me. And to me, as a domain scientist, I'm just a physicist. I'm not a technologist. To me, that's unbelievably scary. I don't want all of this crap of domain science-specific architectures. I want to just use a machine and use it easily and don't have to sweat all this technology stuff. And so there is a fundamental challenge to the entire scientific community of how to deal with the left plot and how to make sense out of the right plot in some kind of context. And given that I believe that the writing is on the wall and unambiguously on the wall, I want to have NRP have a garden of architectures to expose, to give the likes of John Graham and computer scientists a playground. Let them play to their heart's content. But also have this playground socially networked with a scientific community that uses the same infrastructure and therefore can sort of move back and forth. And maybe in the process, we find ways to accelerate adoption and therefore accelerate acceleration of scientific advances of using technology in the process. That's really the core of this second point. And that's really the core of why we have FPGAs on NRP and why we bought the AI100 from Qualcomm, because different and new kinds of technology is worthwhile having for the geeks to play and then assimilated into the scientists that aren't computer scientists. And my last topic is something that I am normally never speaking about, and I'm very uncomfortable with, but I think has to be spoken about here very prominently, because I'm kind of shocked at the number of cybersecurity incidents that we had and the kind of brazenness that I've seen in the last year. I would claim that I have seen more brazen cybersecurity violations in the last year than the 20 years prior. And it's nowhere in my slides, but I want to just say it. For 20 years, I've worked predominantly with domain scientists. For the last year, I've worked predominantly with computer scientists and electrical engineers. There's something wrong with these people when it comes to cybersecurity. And I want to show you, and then I want to appeal to you for your help. And I want to also warn you that these are the kind of people that are on NRP, and we collectively will do our damnedest to get this under control one way or the other. And I'll show you a little bit of how you can help and how we're helping. So let me start by, we have an executive use policy, and we require every user to sign this every so often. I sort of guess that none of our users reads it, but maybe. But it is worthwhile spending a minute or so on, because NRP has legal obligations. We're actually legally obligated by our funders to worry about this. That also means, and then the violation of this AAP may result in loss of access to NRP resources, and I'll show you what we ban, what immediately triggers a lifetime ban in the next slide. And activities in violation of any laws will be reported to the proper authority of investigation and prosecution. And I want to tell you 2 anecdotes. I was on jury duty last December in a case where somebody stole $20 worth of stuff out of a supermarket. And the person was convicted for robbery. That person sits in jail now for $20 worth of stealing. So it's not the amount that is being stolen that matters. It's the violation and whether or not it's reportable and whether or not law enforcement gets involved. Next anecdote. 15 years ago or so, 10, 15 years ago, when crypto mining first came up, STC had a staff member be caught crypto mining. That was reported to the NSF, and the NSF reported it, or we reported it, I don't remember, to the FBI. That person was barred for life from any and all NSF activities. So crypto mining is not just something that is, everybody does it. On NSF hardware, it's a federal offense of some sort. And I'm saying this, there's more on except use policy. In particular, you agree to not use NRP services, no allocated resources for any of the following: financial gain, unlawful purpose, Financial crypto mining is financial gain. Anybody who uses NRP because, well, there are GPUs in there. Let's see how this works. I'm a computer scientist. I'm not bound by rules or regulation or laws. Anything that can be done should be done. Not only will you lose access for life on NRP, you may or may not be prosecuted by the feds. So far, we have not gone that far, but somehow this has to be kept under control. And now, moreover, we've actually put in place automated detection of crypto mining. Whereas you used to be able to assume, they're not going to catch me. That assumption is now dead in the water. You now have to assume that if you send a job that mines crypto, we will catch you. Because it's automated. It just happens to be looked for all the time. It's not sysadmins anymore that try to find it. It's some kind of piece of software that just finds it. And that is a game changer. And I want to make this raise awareness for all of you, because I don't want to be in a situation next year to have again 4 crypto mining incidents in 1 year on NRP. I think it's 4. It's on this next slide. And I want to also call to action for all of those of you who are a namespace admin or PI, and think about your onboarding process and your offboarding process. Because when I walk you through the kinds of cybersecurity incidents we've had, it's all in the onboarding and the offboarding. If we had every admin of a namespace and every PI had better onboarding and offboarding processes, the majority of these things that we've seen would not have happened. And so what's actually happened, I let you read this in your leisure and just focus on what is the lessons learned. First lesson learned, never expose your IPMI interface to the public internet. We don't, you shouldn't either. And there should be no question in the room that IPMI interfaces should never be exposed to the public internet. The incident that we had at UCSD had nothing to do with NRP. It was a different cluster that also used the same technologies and happened to be exposing. We had told those people, you cannot expose your IPMI internet to the public internet, and they did it anyway. They got hacked, they got ransomware, all hell broke loose. That's an absolute no-no. Then the next one, always use strong passwords. The next incident is somebody ran a PostgreSQL database as a service on NRP, and they used a very weak password for Postgres, and the password got hacked because, look, we're in a public university. There is people hacking us all the time, non-stop. It's just the place we live. And so if you have a weak password, you will get hacked. It's virtually guaranteed. And so that was the next one. And now, of course, they hacked Postgres, they got access, and then they looked around the entire neighborhood and were basically do port spamming, and we caught the port spamming. We didn't catch the violation, and that's how we caught the violated container and da. So I think that's an important message. I've already said we automated crypto mining, and the last one is the violation that is the most bizarre. We had a student who was banned from NRP, came back onto NRP with another student's credentials, and then was brazen enough to run crypto. I mean, and so I think that there is, it's, don't ever share credentials with anybody. Don't ever use somebody else's credentials. If we catch you, use somebody else's credentials, we will be barred for life from NRP. And so, my apologies to be a pedantic and waste your time with this, but this is what we lived through, experienced for the last year, and I felt that it was appropriate to bring this up in the plenary with the entire community, and to convince you that we are on our toes, we're actually doing the best we can in order to secure the infrastructure. And B, that we need your help because the most significant threat vector are our students and their behavior. We swim in a sea of cybersecurity hacking attempts, but the real risk is our students and their behavior. Finally, two more cheerful things. I want to thank the sponsors. And I want to make, so Sienna is the gold sponsor, General Atomics, a silver sponsor, and then we have 4 different and bronze sponsor, Applied Data Systems, Juniper Networks, Tokamak Energy, and Vocarium. And Vocarium is going to have a demo in the lunch session of they're part of a strategic thrust to provide you a commercial platform that is an education software platform that you can buy into, but I don't want you to have to pay the cloud bill on top. I want you to be able to have a choice across the entire continuum from roll it yourself on your own hardware to get a commercial vendor that offers you a service for educational platform on your hardware, to get a commercial vendor on AWS's hardware and pay through your nose. And I want colleges to have that complete spectrum, and so that's why we engage with Vocarium, and it will demo that they have their first thing running on NRP, so that it is we're pushing that thrust in parallel to all the things that we help you to do homebrew with. I want to make sure that to thank the sponsors and want to tell the sponsors what we use the money for. We use part of the objective is to get people here that would probably not come if they had to find the funds themselves. And so we've used a large fraction of the sponsorship funds to either not have people to select people who didn't have to pay for the registration fees, or even give some people partial travel funding. And so all of those of you who have benefited from this, thank our sponsors, and because without them this would not be possible. This year we had no NSF participation fees. All the participation money that we've spent came from these sponsors. Thank you very much. And I have one more little thing. SDSC has a project that is NSF funded to do a study on AI use. Given that there's a large number of AI folks around here, if you are interested in participating in this study, please contact Jeanette Sperhark, and she asked me to show this. And finally, why did I pick fusion as the first domain science to experiment with? And this plot is a plot of the total energy of computing. And what it shows you, it's from 2015. It's actually a very old plot. Google, that was the only thing I could find from Google. I've seen better plots like this, but that's the best I could find. And so it has the world's energy production on this log scale at the top. You shouldn't take that too literal. And it has the growth of total computing versus time on the x-axis. And then it multiplies in how many joules per bit you need for the total global computing. And if you use your typical system of 2015, you arrive at 10 to the minus 14 joules per bit. And the industry was back then in 2015 targeting 10 to the minus 17. And so, but doesn't matter the details. What you see on this plot, that we're running out of power sometime in the 40s, given on the path of computing that we use in the world. And so, in a funny sense, the computing is going to be the next thing that will drive climate change or global warming in ways that the fossil industry can only dream of. And so there is an interest in finding ubiquitous, cheap sources of power. And so fusion was an obvious connection to computing. And given that fusion is heading on towards an AI everything strategy, it seemed an obvious connection to AI and therefore to us. And that's why I chose fusion as the first domain. We'll figure out something else next year. If you are particularly fond of a particular domain, let me know. Thank you very much. Conclusion. We provide a data and compute platform for higher ed that is cost-effective and aspire to make it available to all colleges in the United States. And we provide a garden of architecture for both domain, CS, and CE research in order to somehow figure out how to walk towards more science done per dollar, despite the fact, via computing, despite the fact we don't get more computing per dollar anymore. Thank you very much.